How's it going, everybody? Welcome back to yet another book review video, and this time I have these five. These five are the five books that I would recommend you read before we really get into the start of 2026. And I would suggest this because not only if you read these five books, I think it's going to put you in a really, really solid spot to advance your career, but it's going to help you do really well in technical interviews. Because, as we said before on this channel, interviews are just a skill like anything else, and it's a combination of having the right social skills and being able to properly articulate all the technical stuff that you know. And if you don't, unfortunately, if you can't articulate the technical aspects, regardless of how well you may know it, if you can't communicate that well, you're gonna get it's gonna hold you back, and you're not gonna do as well as you should in the interviews. So let's get right into this. This book I've read two times, and I actually checked this book out from the library originally. So unfortunately, I don't have as many notes in this book as I would like. So I'm probably going to read through it for a third time. But this book is Trevor Williams, the author, one of my favorite authors for .NET content. I have his other book on my shelf, .NET Memory Management. Phenomenal book, definitely recommend it. But this author, super good. There's not a lot of fluff, and this book is what introduced me really to a lot of the concepts of event-driven design. So this book goes deep into RabbitMQ, mass transit, wiring up consumers in .NET applications, how do .NET microservices communicate with each other. It talks about so much stuff, but the thing I like about it is that it does it, and it's not a very big book. Sometimes you get a book and it's like it's so abstract that it never gets to the point. This book I feel like is always on the point, and it just continues. It's such a good book. I would highly recommend it. Microservices design patterns in .NET. This unbelievable book. I would, if I was going to read a book before 2026, it'd be this one. I strongly recommend this, especially if you are going into a technical interview. I would read this and have it on your shelf and just keep it as a reference book. I've referenced this book many times in my career. Moving on, the next book we're going to talk about is Building Web APIs with ASP.NET Core. This is a Manning Publishers published book, which you know is one of my favorite publishers for technical books. I consistently think they have like very, very high quality stuff. But this one is by Valerio De Sanctis, and the reason I would recommend this book is because it talks a lot about RESTful API design principles in the context of .NET. So I made a video very recently talking about hypermedia as the engine of application state. I think it's what it is. I always get that confused. It talks about that. It shows you how to structure your API responses in a way to adhere to that, which is pretty rare when it comes to .NET API books. I'm looking at my bookshelf now. I think I've read about 4 or 5 of them. This was like the only book that actually provided an example of how to do that. So definitely check this out. I learned a lot about how to structure my RESTful APIs. It goes into topics like pagination. It goes into topics, well, let's see, what else do I have? It goes into Serolog. It goes into distributed Redis cache, Swagger docs, logging, and what security headers you can include in your application. Very, very good book. Again, API books sometimes can be challenging to find because in my experience from reading a lot of these books, sometimes the approach that some authors take is that they assume you don't know anything about programming, but then they take too long to explain the concepts. And by the time they explain everything, like the fundamentals, they don't leave themselves enough room to actually dive into the topic at hand. This book I didn't feel did that. This book I felt like went right into the design principles of APIs and kind of stuck with that topic very well. So again, another reason I like this book is it's not overly long. It's not very long. It's just about 400 pages, which is on the shorter end for some of these design books. I've seen design books going up, for, around 5, 6, 7, even 800 pages sometimes. So definitely check it out if you work with .NET. I would highly recommend it. The next book is probably not to anybody's surprise on this channel. This is Concurrency in .NET. This is probably my most marked up book because I've referenced it so many times professionally. This book, if I was going to tell somebody to buy a book who was a .NET developer, this would be the book. This is the best book in .NET development I think you can buy. I bought this not really knowing what it was a few years ago, and it is still the best book in .NET I have read, and I've read about 50 books since then. This book is unbelievable in the topics it brings up. And this book is the book that changed how I've programmed because it introduced functional programming to me, but it introduced it in a way that was practical, right? Sometimes sometimes you read about all these abstract concepts and, they sound fancy, but sometimes it never gets into like the application. This book didn't do that. This book introduced functional programming to me, and it completely changed how I think about code. And it introduced, to me at least, one of the coolest features in .NET. And I've talked about it on this channel, but honestly, I don't think I've done this topic justice. It specifically is propagator blocks. I think propagator blocks are one of the most underutilized features in all of .NET. They're so powerful, unbelievably powerful. And this book talks about them. It shows you how, like, the ins and outs of how to like tune them, how to make your pipelines. It's unbelievable. If you're a .NET developer, you need this book. It needs to be on your shelf. Because I have never referenced a book more than I have this book for my career. It's just phenomenal. I mean, I don't even know where to begin to talk about all the things that I've read about in this book. It talks about so much about functional programming. It talks, again, propagator blocks is a massive one. Pipelines, buffer blocks, cancellation tokens, asynchronous coding, writing code to support being executed in parallel, continue with on tasks. I mean, there's just so much information in this book. If you are going into an interview and you want to feel confident, read this book. For me, it completely changed how I approach .NET development. I can't undersell it enough I can't oversell it enough. It's just an incredible read. It is a very dense book. I will say that. It's about 500 pages and it's very dense. So it's definitely not a quick read, but for me, the more you get into it, the more excited you get about the topics because you're like, why have I never seen this stuff before? Especially propagator blocks. Like, anyway, I could talk about a whole video on that easy. So next book we're going to go and do because we got to get off that topic. This book is Web Scalability for the Startup Engineer by, Concurrency in .NET is by Ricardo Terrell. This book is by Artur Esmont. I'm sorry if I mispronounced that. Web Scalability for Startup Engineers, Tips and Techniques for Scaling Your Web Application. Phenomenal book. This is a McGraw-Hill education book. Absolutely outstanding. If you are going into a technical interview, I know I've said this about every book on this video so far, but I think about this book too. If you're going into an interview, read this book. If you're working as a developer too and you want to get to a senior, I would read this book because this book does a phenomenal job about introducing system design components, but it talks about it in a way that's actually practical. For example, it talks about front-end scaling. It talks about sharding. It talks about caching. It talks about how to make your cache keys. It talks about queues and when you can use them. Asynchronous programming. It talks about cardinality for indexing. It talks about so many things, and it does it in a way that, again, just kind of makes sense. And for me, I've read other system design books, but this book I saw referenced in another system design book. I'm like, oh, okay, well, what's this book? And I read it, and now I know why it was like the primary reference, because this book is phenomenal. But it's not a very talked about book. It's not really that popular, I don't think, at least from what I've seen. But it really should be. And like, I definitely have referenced this. It has some good diagrams too, because when you do get to like higher roles in software development, you're going to be doing a lot of diagramming, especially diagramming systems and just kind of walking through how the data is flowing throughout your system. So this book just will set you up for to do that really well and effective, and it's going to give you a lot of the vocabulary necessary to have a system design conversation. Because what you'll find is that a lot of people don't read. And if you can read these books and just have them available to you, like have like sit them on like rest like let them be on your shelf, mark them up, writing them, that's going to help you tremendously in your career, and it's going to help you grow faster compared to compared if you didn't read it all. So anyway, web scalability, definitely check this out. I've talked about it on the channel before, but very, very good. The last book I went back and forth on. I almost picked the memory management book because I think it's an under talked about topic, but I ended up going with this book, and it's Building Modern SaaS Applications with C# and .NET. The reason I went with this book is because it talks about multi-tenancy. And multi-tenancy is a very important topic in the context of SaaS applications. And the reason I think it's important to know about is because I think it's going to help you in interviews. If you can talk fluently about that topic, I think it's going to help you in your thinking about databases, database design, which is usually a topic of conversation in interviews. But it also goes into API design with that in mind. And this book for me, it did a good job talking about the differences between all the verbs, the HTTP verbs, which is usually a interview topic. So it talked about HTTP patch. So it shows you how to do patch requests using a JSON patch document, which is a very powerful tool. Now natively available in .NET 10, by the way. But it's a very, very good book. And it talks about, again, multi-tenancy. It talks about different HTTP verbs. It talks about logging, caching auth tokens. It talks about, SQL optimization, scalability. This book is the last on my list for a reason, too. I wouldn't recommend it as much as the other books on this list, but I would recommend it because it talks about topics that aren't usually discussed in other books: multi-tenancy, patch, SQL optimization, things like that. But another reason I think that this book is an interesting read is because it has some hot takes on certain topics like entity framework and scalability. So I'd be interested to see what other people think, because I actually found myself disagreeing with a couple opinions in this book. So I would honestly be interested to see, once people read these 4 books, then come to read this book, if you agree with everything in this book, because I found myself not agreeing with everything. But the technical things presented in the book I thought were really, really good. So, but again, multi-tenancy, massive topic, especially if you're going to work in SaaS application, software as a service, which is a lot of like what probably you're going to be finding yourself working in, because that's a lot of what the job market is filled with, those kind of roles. So again, good book. This one's on the shorter end of books. This one's by Andy Watt. This is Build, Deploy, Maintain Professional SaaS Applications. I would say it's a bit of an over exaggeration, that little sub point. But the information, I think this book for me, it was like halfway there, but I felt like it could have been so much better if it stuck to the multi-tenancy theme, because that is like the crux of SaaS applications, right? How do you design with that in mind? And it's like it showed you. I was super excited in the beginning of the book because it like showed you code in the context of like multi-tenancy and SaaS, but then it like did a 180 and started talking about like fundamentals again. And man, it can be frustrating. But for like the first half of the book, that's kind of why I would recommend this. But again, moving into 2026, these are my 5 book recommendations that if you want to feel like interview ready and feel very confident going into the interviews, I would read these 5 books and then I would practice talking about the topics in front of a camera or have somebody ask you questions or write them down, but practice it and make sure that you have an understanding of everything in these 5 books. So again, just to make yourself feel like you're ready, but interviews are hard, right? And reading helps you feel more confident. So let me know what you all think. I'll see you in the next one.